1. The smell of smoke and the memory of safety. If there is one thing I have learned about memory, it is that our minds do not hold onto dates or facts as tightly as they hold onto scents and flavors. For me, that memory is the smell of smoke from burning wood. When I was a child, that smoke meant safety. It meant family gathered around the hearth, bread baking in cast iron pans, beans simmering all day long, and laughter rising with the sparks. I thought the fire was eternal, a guardian that would never allow harm to enter our circle. But years later, when I became a physician, the same smell of smoke began to stir something different in me. It began to remind me not of laughter but of blood, heat, and hidden hands working in the dark. You see, most people think of red meat as food, as nourishment, as a tradition carried from generation to generation. But I must warn you, behind the red meat lies a story very few have seen. It is not only a matter of diet or medicine. It is a matter of commerce, deception, and danger. What you are about to read is not an academic paper, nor a lecture. It is my testimony. And like any confession, it begins with nostalgia sweet, almost innocent before it turns bitter too. The forgotten recipes, beauty and omen. Before we step into the darkness, let us linger for a moment in the firelight among the forgotten foods of the past. These were dishes built not from abundance, but from necessity. People did not always have meat. They relied on grains, beans, fruits, roots, and occasionally, when the hunt was successful, a modest portion of meat shared among many. Consider these: Dutch oven peach cobbler, a cast iron miracle where canned peaches and flour turned into dessert for a whole camp. Its sweetness was a celebration of survival. Sourdough flapjacks, thick, tangy pancakes made with starters kept alive in leather pouches. They were heavy, sustaining, and more precious than gold in a mining camp. Cowboy beans, simmered with salt pork, onions, and thyme, more protein than luxury, more smoke than spice. Each dish told a story of endurance. Each was a reminder that life was once measured not by luxury, but by resourcefulness. And yet, look around your table today. Where are these dishes now? How many families still eat them? They have not simply vanished by accident. Their disappearance is not merely the result of changing taste. They were pushed aside, replaced by something cheaper, shinier, more profitable. Their absence, I have come to realize, was the first sign of a rising tide, a tide of red meat flooding every market, every plate, every body. 3. The first clue, the vanishing variety. During my early medical training in a rural community, I noticed something peculiar. The elders often spoke fondly of foods that were no longer common: bean breads, wild greens, stews thickened with cornmeal. Yet in their kitchens I saw only meat, beef, pork, lamb, plentiful and cheap. A farmer once told me, 10 years ago we could not afford meat every day. Now the market is overflowing. We do not ask where it comes from. We only thank God it is here. But I did ask where it came from. I asked too many questions. And the answers, or rather the silence, unsettled me. Supply had outstripped the natural capacity of the land. Livestock multiplied beyond the field's ability to sustain them. Trucks rolled into town with more meat than could have been slaughtered locally. And no one seemed concerned. At that time, I did not know I was staring at the edges of a shadow economy. I only knew that the disappearance of old recipes was not cultural forgetfulness. It was displacement. It was the consequence of a market that demanded meat in every home, every day. For when meat stops being food, in medicine, we are trained to look beneath the surface. A rash may be only skin deep, or it may signal a disease raging within. So too with meat. It may appear to be food, but it can carry the marks of something much darker. Patients often ask me, "Doctor, is red meat bad for my health?" They expect me to speak of cholesterol, blood pressure, heart disease. And I do. But the truth is far more unsettling. Because sometimes the danger of meat is not biological, it is economic and political. It is in what was done to the animal before it reached your plate. I have seen cattle injected with chemicals to preserve the illusion of freshness long after death. I have seen frozen carcasses imported from unknown sources, thawed, and relabeled as local and fresh. I have stood outside slaughterhouses that operated only at night, where the air stank of blood and fear, and where official stamps of approval were printed in back rooms like counterfeit currency. Do you understand? When you bite into a steak, you may not only be consuming protein and fat, you may be consuming fraud, corruption, and poison disguised as dinner. 5. A patient who carried the evidence. There was one man I cannot forget. He was 53 years old, neither drinker nor smoker, a quiet mechanic who rarely travelled beyond his county line. He came to me with jaundice, fatigue, and an abdomen swollen like a drum. His liver was failing, but the tests baffled us. He had no viral hepatitis, no family history, no alcohol abuse. What he had, instead, was a liver saturated with antibiotics and growth hormones, compounds never meant to be in a human body at such levels. When I asked about his diet, his answer was simple: meat. I like my meat. Every meal, every day. Bought from the same market, same supplier. I wrote his case in my notes, but the truth haunted me. He was not a patient. He was a victim, a casualty of an industry that feeds not only hunger but addiction to cheap, endless red meat. His body was the crime scene. 6. The echo of forgotten foods. In that moment, I thought again of the dishes that had disappeared, the beans, the breads, the grains that once filled tables. They were not only nutritious, they were protective. They diluted the meat, balanced the diet, gave the body a chance to rest. Their disappearance was not cultural amnesia, it was sabotage. They had been erased to make room for one thing and one thing only: the dominance of red meat. And dominance never comes without a price. But be warned, once you cross it, you will never again look at a steak, a burger, or a strip of bacon without suspicion. What I have seen in my years as a doctor is not only disease, it is the anatomy of an underground empire, one that feeds on blood, secrecy, and profit. Let us begin not in a kitchen or a clinic, but in the places where meat begins its journey: the slaughterhouse, the transport truck, the border crossing, the cold storage facility. Places most people never think about, but where the real story is written in blood and ice. 2. The slaughterhouse that never slept. It was 2 in the morning when I first stood outside a slaughterhouse that operated illegally at night. The sound was unforgettable: the lowing of cattle, the metallic clatter of chains, the hiss of steam, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of blood hitting concrete. Inside, animals were not inspected. They were not tracked. They were processed in the dark, without records, without regulations. Trucks waited to carry away the meat before dawn. By sunrise, it would be stamped, packaged, and displayed in markets as if it had passed every health standard. When I later treated patients with rare infections, bacteria resistant to common antibiotics, I traced their cases back to meat purchased at those very markets. It was then I realized the slaughterhouse is not just a place of death for animals. It is the first chamber in a chain of human casualties. 3. The path of the meat, a map written in blood. To understand the danger, you must understand the journey. Meat does not travel in straight lines. It flows like contraband, weaving through legal and illegal channels, shifting labels like a chameleon. A cow raised in one country may be slaughtered in another, processed in a third, and sold as local in a fourth. Frozen carcasses rejected for contamination in one port may quietly reappear, rebranded, in another. Meat expired by regulation can be soaked in chemicals that restore its red color, making it look fresh again. Every stage of the journey adds not clarity, but layers of deception, and every layer hides new risks: bacterial growth, chemical exposure, mislabeling of origin, substitution of species. As a doctor, I was trained to trace symptoms back to causes, but in the case of red meat, the trail was often so tangled, so deliberately obscured, that the cause was never found, only the consequence: illness, weakness, and sometimes death. 4. The black markets of red flesh. Most people imagine black markets as places for drugs, weapons, or stolen jewels. Few realize that one of the largest black markets in the world deals not in gold, but in flesh. In certain cities, entire districts are devoted to the clandestine trade of meat, exotic species slaughtered for status, diseased livestock sold cheaply to the poor, counterfeit labels promising organic or grass-fed slapped onto factory-farmed products pumped with hormones. Once, a colleague of mine in infectious diseases showed me photographs from a raid. Meat hung from rusty hooks, swarming with flies, in a warehouse without refrigeration. This meat was bound for restaurants that proudly advertised premium beef. The diners would never know. Their bodies would be the testing ground. 5. Patients who carried secrets. Over the years, patients arrived in my office carrying not only sickness, but evidence. There was the child with mysterious fevers, later traced to parasites from undercooked smuggled lamb. The young woman with autoimmune collapse, linked to hormonal residues in the beef she had eaten daily for years. The elderly man with stomach cancer, his tissue samples glowing with nitrosamines formed from processed meats preserved far beyond their natural life. Each case was like a page torn from a hidden book. Together, they told a story more disturbing than any textbook of pathology. 6. The power behind the market. You may wonder, how can such a system exist? How can governments, inspectors, and scientists look away? The answer is power. The red meat industry is a giant, with tentacles in politics, advertising, and finance. Its influence ensures that regulations are softened, violations are overlooked, and warnings are muted. I have attended conferences where respected experts avoided the topic of contaminated meat altogether, steering instead to safe subjects like exercise and lifestyle. I have watched policymakers accept donations from meat lobbies while drafting dietary guidelines that encourage daily consumption. The truth is not silenced because it is unknown. It is silenced because it is inconvenient. 7. The psychological trap. But let me tell you something even darker. The danger of the red meat market is not only in the body, it is in the mind. Advertising has transformed meat from food into identity. A steak is not dinner, it is masculinity. A burger is not a meal, it is freedom. Bacon is not breakfast, it is culture, even obsession. By turning meat into symbol, the industry has created dependency. People do not merely eat it. They defend it. They demand it. They laugh at those who warn against it. And so the market grows, feeding not only stomachs, but egos, not only bodies, but illusions. 8. The forgotten alternatives. Do you remember the foods I described in part 1? The breads, beans, stews, porridges. They were not just recipes, they were protection. They balanced diets, provided fiber, reduced reliance on meat. Their disappearance was engineered. Cheap red meat flooded the shelves, drowning out diversity, until whole generations forgot how to eat without it. As a doctor, I see the result every day. Bodies inflamed, arteries clogged, immune systems weakened. And behind the statistics lies the simple truth: people no longer eat the way their grandparents did. They have been trapped in a system designed not for their health, but for profit. 9. The hidden epidemics. When we speak of epidemics, we think of viruses. But there are epidemics of another kind, silent and slow. Heart disease, driven not only by fat but by chemicals hidden in meat. Cancer, fueled by carcinogenic preservatives. Resistance, as bacteria from over-medicated livestock pass into human hosts, rendering our antibiotics useless. These are not accidents. They are the predictable outcome of a system that prizes production over protection, profit over people. And the cost is not counted in dollars, but in years of life stolen. 10. Standing at the edge. So where does this leave us? Where does it leave me, as a doctor who has seen both the nostalgic glow of forgotten foods and the crimson shadow of the red meat market? It leaves me standing at the edge of a truth too large for one man, yet too dangerous to ignore. I cannot stop the market. I cannot silence its power. But I can tell you what I have seen. I can place this story in your hands. hoping you will read it not only as testimony, but as a warning. Because the red meat you see in stores, on plates, in advertisements, is never just meat. It is the end of a chain of decisions, compromises, and crimes. It carries the fingerprints of hands you will never shake. 11. Final warning. I began with the smell of smoke, the memory of safety. Let me end with another image. Picture a table. On it sits a plate of red meat, juicy, glistening, tempting. Now imagine the shadows that stretch from that plate, a slaughterhouse in the night, a freezer full of rejected carcasses, a ledger of bribes and false certificates, a hospital bed where a man clutches his failing liver. That is what you eat when you eat without questioning. The firelight recipes of the past have vanished, and in their place stands a beast that feeds on your hunger. I have told you this story because I cannot keep it inside any longer. I have walked the corridors of hospitals, the alleys of markets, the silent rooms of dying patients. I have seen enough to know that the red meat market is not merely dangerous, it is deadly. Now the question is yours to answer. Will you continue to feed the beast? Or will you remember the foods, the traditions, the balance that once kept our bodies strong and our tables safe? The choice, at last, is in your hands.